What happens when the world's most important oil route does not just close for a few days, but comes back under new rules? That is the real fear now, because this is no longer only about ships, missiles, or one failed ceasefire. Before we go deeper, tap, like if you want clear analysis without the noise, subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the next global shock, and share this with one person who still thinks energy prices are only about local gas stations. The deal was supposed to calm the world down. It was supposed to stop the fighting, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, lower oil prices, and give diplomats enough time to build something more permanent. Instead, the opposite appears to be happening. Iran has stepped away from the talks. The ceasefire is cracking. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer being treated like a normal international waterway. And the most dangerous part is this. Iran may not be trying to keep it closed in the old sense. Iran may be trying to reopen it as something completely different. A waterway where ships do not simply pass. A waterway where ships ask permission. A waterway where some countries get special treatment, others face pressure, and the entire world slowly adjusts to a new reality. That is why the phrase permanently closed matters. It does not only mean that no ship can ever pass again, it means the old Strait of Hormuz, the one global markets depended on for decades, may be gone. The old system was simple in principle. Ships moved through, oil flowed. The world treated Hormuz as an international passage that could not be owned by one power. Now Iran is pushing a different idea. If you want to pass, you deal with Iran. If you want protection, you coordinate with Iran. If you want stable access, you accept Iran's role. And if you do not accept that role, then your ships, your economy, and your fuel prices become part of the pressure campaign. This is the deeper story behind the failed deal. The public conversation keeps asking one simple question: will Iran reopen the Strait of Hormuz? But the better question is, reopen it under whose authority? Because that is the heart of the crisis. The United States wants Hormuz open, free, and untouched by Iranian tolls or permit systems. Washington's position is that no one country should control a waterway that carries a massive share of the world's energy. That position is not just about pride. It is about the global economy. It is about whether oil from the Gulf can reach Asia, Europe, and the rest of the world without one military force deciding the terms. Iran's position is almost the exact opposite. Iran is saying, in effect, this is our neighborhood, our security zone, our pressure point, and our leverage. If the world wants peace, the world must accept that Iran has a special authority here. Those two positions do not fit together. You can compromise on timelines. You can compromise on prisoner exchanges. You can compromise on sanctions relief. You can even compromise on inspection schedules. But you cannot easily compromise on whether a strategic waterway is free for global passage or controlled by one state. That is not a small disagreement. That's a clash of systems. And this is why the deal was always weaker than it looked. When the ceasefire was first presented, every side seemed to describe it differently. One side said it included Lebanon. Another side said it did not. One side said Iran had agreed to safe passage. Another side said the United States had accepted Iran's broader plan. One side talked about de-escalation. Another side talked about victory. That kind of confusion is not a detail. It is a warning sign. Strong agreements usually have clear language. Weak agreements survive because every side pretends the words mean something different. That is what seems to have happened here. The deal did not solve the main conflict. It delayed it. It gave everyone a little time. It let markets breathe. It let leaders claim progress, but underneath the diplomatic language, the real question stayed untouched. Who controls Hormuz? And now that question has returned with force. Iran's move to suspend communication with mediators is not just a dramatic gesture. It is a signal that Tehran believes the diplomatic track is no longer serving its goals, or that it can gain more by applying pressure than by signing a deal that limits its new position. At the same time, Iranian-linked statements and regional reports have pointed toward a broader strategy. Pressure at Hormuz, pressure near the Bab el-Mandeb, and pressure through allied groups across the region. That matters because Hormuz is not the only energy choke point. The Bab el-Mandeb connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. It is a narrow route that affects shipping between Europe and Asia. If both Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb become unstable at the same time, the world does not face a normal oil shock. It faces a supply chain shock, an insurance shock, a military shock, and a political shock all at once. And markets understand this faster than politicians admit it. Oil prices do not wait for press conferences. They move when risk changes. When traders believe a deal is coming, prices fall. When they believe the deal is dying, prices rise. That is why the movements in crude oil are so important. The market is not just pricing barrels. It is pricing fear. It is pricing uncertainty. It is pricing the possibility that this crisis is not temporary. For ordinary people, this sounds distant until it is not. A tanker delayed in the Gulf becomes higher shipping costs. Higher shipping costs become higher food prices. Higher oil prices become higher gasoline prices. Higher gasoline prices become higher delivery costs, airline tickets, electricity bills, fertilizer prices, and pressure on nearly everything people buy. That is how a narrow strip of water thousands of miles away shows up inside a family budget. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is not just a Middle East story, it is a global household story. But to understand why Iran would take such a huge risk, we have to look at what Tehran may believe it has gained. For years, Iran has been under sanctions, military pressure, cyber pressure, and diplomatic isolation. Its leaders know they cannot match the United States ship for ship, plane for plane, or dollar for dollar. So Iran focuses on leverage. It looks for places where a smaller power can force a larger system to feel pain. Hormuz is the perfect example. Iran does not need to control the entire world economy. It only needs to threaten one place that the world economy cannot ignore. That is why the strait is so powerful. It is geography turned into strategy. And now Iran appears to be turning strategy into administration. This is the part many people miss. A missile strike is dramatic. A drone attack is dramatic. A warship moving through the Gulf is dramatic. But a permit system can be even more important in the long run. Because a permit system says, this is normal now. A toll says, we are not just blocking you, we are charging you. An exemption says, we can reward friends and punish enemies. A public authority says, this is not chaos, this is governance. That is the genius and danger of what Iran appears to be building. It is not only using force, it is trying to create facts on the water that later become facts in law, diplomacy, and business. If ships start applying for permission, then permission becomes part of the routine. If certain countries get better access, then those countries have a reason not to challenge the system too strongly. If insurers price the route, as controlled by Iran, then the market begins to accept that control even without a formal treaty. And if this continues long enough, the old idea of a fully open Hormuz becomes harder and harder to restore. If you're still watching, this is where your attention really matters. Hit the like button like you are marking this moment on the map. Subscribe so you do not miss the next turn in this crisis. And send this video to someone who needs to understand why a shipping lane can change the price of their entire week. The key point is simple. Temporary control can become permanent if the world adapts to it. That is how history often works. Many major changes do not begin with a grand announcement. They begin as emergency measures. Then companies adjust. Governments adapt. New paperwork appears. New fees appear. New security rules appear. After a while, people stop asking why the system exists. They simply learn how to operate inside it. Iran may be counting on that. Not a clean victory. Not a total military victory, but a slow victory through acceptance. That is why the failed deal matters so much. If the deal had clearly removed Iran's administrative role from Hormuz, then Washington could claim the old order had been restored. If the deal had clearly recognized Iran's authority, then Tehran could claim a strategic victory. But if the deal avoided the issue, then the most likely winner would be the reality already forming on the water. And that reality appears to favor Iran's long-term pressure strategy. This is also why Lebanon matters. To many outside observers, Lebanon looks like a separate front, but to Iran, it is part of the same strategic map. Hezbollah has long been one of Iran's most important tools of deterrence against Israel. If Israel continues operations in southern Lebanon, while Iran is expected to stand down elsewhere, Tehran sees that as a trap. From Iran's point of view, it cannot agree to calm in the Gulf while its main allied force near Israel is being weakened on land. So when Iran links the ceasefire to Lebanon, it is not just adding a random condition. It is saying that the region is connected. Hormuz, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and the Red Sea are all pieces of one pressure network. Washington and Israel may not accept that framing, but Iran does. And in diplomacy, what each side believes matters as much as what each side says. This is why the ceasefire was fragile from the beginning. One side wanted a limited deal, the other side wanted a regional equation. One side wanted ships moving again, the other side wanted recognition of a new balance of power. Those are very different goals, and when goals differ that much, every incident becomes dangerous. A drone strike, a naval warning, a missile launch, a denied attack, a tanker delay, or a statement by a militia can suddenly become the excuse for the entire process to collapse. This is what makes the current moment so unstable. Nobody fully controls the escalation ladder. The diplomats may want time. The military commanders may want pressure. The political leaders may want public victory. The markets may want certainty. The public wants lower prices and less fear. But each group is moving according to its own logic. And when too many actors move at once, the risk of miscalculation grows. There's another layer here, the nuclear issue. The Strait of Hormuz is the visible crisis. The nuclear program is the deeper crisis that never went away. Iran wants recognition of its right to enrich uranium. The United States wants limits, inspections, and guarantees that Iran cannot race toward a nuclear weapon. Iran sees enrichment as sovereignty. Washington sees unrestricted enrichment as a threat. This mirrors the Hormuz dispute almost perfectly. Iran says, this is our right. Washington says, this affects the whole world. Iran says, accept our sovereignty. Washington says, not when global security is at stake. So the nuclear issue and the Hormuz issue are not separate problems. They are two versions of the same argument. How much power can Iran claim for itself before the outside world says no? And how much pressure can the outside world apply before Iran decides escalation is more useful than compromise? That is the dangerous balance. If Iran believes it can survive pressure, it will keep pushing. If Washington believes Iran's gains are becoming permanent, it may increase pressure. If Israel believes Hezbollah is weakened but not finished, it may continue operations. If Gulf states fear being trapped between Iran and the United States, they may quietly hedge. And if China, India, and other major energy buyers receive special access, they may call for peace while also benefiting from the new system. This is how a global order begins to split, not always through speeches, sometimes through shipping contracts, sometimes through insurance rates, sometimes through quiet exemptions, sometimes through who pays, who waits, and who passes. The countries that depend most on Gulf energy cannot simply ignore Iran's system if that system becomes the practical gateway to oil. They may dislike it. They may avoid saying they accept it. But if their ships use it, if their companies coordinate with it, and if their governments negotiate exceptions inside it, then the system gains weight. That is why Iran does not need every country to praise its position. It only needs enough countries to use the system. Use creates legitimacy. Legitimacy creates permanence. And permanence becomes very hard to reverse. This creates a serious problem for the United States. American power is very strong when the question is military. The U.S. Navy can move carrier groups. It can strike targets. It can escort ships. It can destroy vessels and hit launch sites. But this problem is not only military, it is legal, it is commercial, it is diplomatic, it is psychological. If Iran fires a missile, America can respond with force. But if Iran creates a permit office and countries quietly use it, what exactly is the response? Sanctions can target the system. Military force can challenge enforcement. Diplomacy can rally allies, but none of that automatically erases the behavior of companies and governments that have already adapted. That is why administrative power is so dangerous. It looks boring. It looks technical. But it can change reality. A form can do what a missile cannot. A fee can do what a threat cannot. A special exemption can pull countries into a new order without forcing them to publicly choose sides. And this is why the old Hormuz may already be damaged beyond a quick repair. Even if a deal is signed tomorrow, shipping companies will not instantly forget the risk. Insurers will not instantly lower their prices to the old levels. Energy buyers will not instantly trust the route. Governments will not instantly assume the crisis is over. Trust is easy to break and slow to rebuild. That is especially true in maritime trade. Ships are expensive. Cargo is valuable. Crews are vulnerable. Delays are costly. No major company wants to gamble billions of dollars on political promises that can collapse in one news cycle. So when analysts say Hormuz could reopen, we need to ask, reopen how? Fully? Partly? Under escort? Under Iranian permission? Under temporary exemptions? With tolls? Without tolls? For everyone? Or only for countries Iran chooses not to pressure? Each answer creates a different world, and right now the world does not know which one it is entering. That uncertainty is the real crisis. The energy market can handle high prices better than it can handle unknown rules. Companies can plan for expensive oil. They can plan for longer routes. They can plan for higher insurance. What they cannot easily plan for is a waterway where the rules change based on politics, retaliation, and back-channel deals. That kind of uncertainty spreads. It spreads into oil futures. It spreads into military planning. It spreads into central bank inflation forecasts. It spreads into elections. It spreads into food security. And in poorer countries, it spreads into instability very fast. This is one of the most painful parts of the story. The people who will suffer first and hardest are not the people making the decisions. They are workers, drivers, farmers, small business owners, and families in countries that import energy and have very little room for price shocks. A government with deep reserves can survive higher oil for a while. A wealthy household can complain and adjust. But a poor family that already spends most of its income on food and fuel has no cushion. When oil rises, food rises. When food rises, anger rises. When anger rises, governments shake. So the Strait of Hormuz is not just a place on a map. It is a pressure valve for the global social order. And if that valve is controlled, taxed, restricted, or weaponized, the effects move far beyond the Gulf. Now pause for 1 second and do something useful with that concern. If this video is helping you see the bigger picture, press subscribe before the next headline hits. Leave a like so more people get this analysis instead of panic. And share it with someone who watches the news but still feels like the pieces do not connect. There's another uncomfortable truth. Iran may not need the world to formally admit that the old system is dead. It only needs the world to behave as if it is. That is how gray zone victories work. Nobody signs a surrender. Nobody holds a parade. Nobody says the rules have changed. But ships take different routes. Companies file new forms. Governments make quiet calls. Prices move. Military patrols adjust. And slowly, the new reality becomes normal. This is the part of the crisis that deserves the most attention. Because the world is very good at reacting to explosions, but not very good at reacting to slow institutional capture. If a port burns, everyone sees it. If a tanker's hit, everyone sees it. If a drone strikes an airport, everyone sees it. But if a new authority starts processing transit requests, if certain flags get favorable treatment, if payments move through channels designed to avoid sanctions, if VHF radio checks become routine, the change can happen in plain sight without the same emotional shock. Yet the long-term impact may be larger. Iran's strongest move may not be closing Hormuz. It may be convincing the world that Hormuz can only function through Iran. That is a much bigger claim, and that is why the United States cannot treat this only as a ceasefire problem. The question is not just whether the shooting stops. The question is what remains after the shooting stops. If the answer is a Strait of Hormuz, where Iran still screens, charges, rewards, and threatens passage, then the old order has not been restored. It has been replaced by a contested system with a diplomatic label placed over it. That would be a major strategic shift. And it would raise a hard question. What did all the military pressure achieve if the administrative structure survives? This is not an argument that military force is useless. It is not. Force can stop attacks. Force can destroy weapons. Force can protect ships. Force can change calculations. But force alone does not always defeat a political project. And Iran's project here appears political as much as military. It wants recognition. It wants leverage. It wants revenue. It wants to show allies that resistance works. It wants to show rivals that pressure has costs. It wants to show major energy buyers that dealing with Tehran is safer than trying to bypass it. That is a complex strategy. And complex strategies require complex responses. The response would have to include military deterrence, yes, but also legal pressure, diplomatic unity, shipping guarantees, insurance support, sanctions enforcement, and a clear alternative for countries tempted to accept Iran's system because it is convenient. Without that, the world may drift. And drift favors the side that is building facts on the ground, or in this case, facts on the water. This is why time matters. Every day without a clear agreement allows new habits to form. Every week of controlled transit makes controlled transit feel less shocking. Every exemption granted to a major country makes the system harder to isolate. Every company that learns how to operate inside the new rules becomes less interested in fighting them. And every market movement reminds governments that energy security can overpower legal principle when the pressure gets high enough. The United States wants the principle of free passage. Iran wants the reality of managed passage. The world may say it supports the principle while slowly adapting to the reality. That is the danger, because once reality wins, principle becomes a speech. So where does this go next? There are a few possible paths. One path is a real deal. Iran returns to talks, the mediators pull the sides back together, and a temporary arrangement is signed. Oil prices calm down. Ships begin moving more regularly. Leaders claim success. But if that deal does not clearly dismantle Iran's control structure, it may only freeze the conflict in a new shape. Another path is open escalation. Iran increases pressure at Hormuz. Allied groups increase pressure elsewhere. The United States and its partners respond. Oil spikes, insurance markets panic, shipping reroutes expand. The world moves closer to a multi-front crisis. A third path is the most likely and maybe the most dangerous. Neither peace nor full war. A gray zone. Some ships pass, some do not. Some countries get quiet deals, some face threats. Markets remain nervous. Diplomats keep talking. Militaries keep preparing. And the old idea of Hormuz as a normal international passage fades a little more each month. That is the path where permanent change can happen without one single dramatic moment. And that may be exactly why it is so hard to stop. Because the world keeps waiting for the crisis to announce itself clearly. But maybe it already has. It announced itself when the talks broke down. It announced itself when Iran tied Hormuz to wider regional fronts. It announced itself when the language shifted from temporary closure to future control. It announced itself when markets stopped believing fully in peace. It announced itself when the question changed from when will ships pass to who decides which ships pass. That is the question that defines the future of Hormuz. Not the headlines, not the optimistic quotes, not the emergency meetings. The real question is who decides. If the answer is international law, then the old order survives. If the answer is Iranian power, then the old order is already broken. If the answer is different for different countries, then the world is entering a fragmented energy system where access depends on alignment, payment, and political risk. That would be a darker world, a world where choke points become bargaining chips, a world where trade routes become loyalty tests, a world where energy security depends less on open seas and more on private arrangements with armed states and their networks. And once one country proves that this works, others will study the lesson. That is why this crisis is bigger than Iran. It is bigger than the United States. It is bigger than one ceasefire. It is a test of whether the global economy can still defend the open routes it depends on. Because globalization was built on a quiet assumption, that the main arteries of trade would remain open enough for the system to function. Hormuz challenges that assumption. And if Hormuz changes permanently, the world will not just pay more for oil, it will think differently about risk, alliances, shipping, reserves, and power. The final point is this: do not only watch the missiles, watch the paperwork. Do not only watch the speeches, watch the shipping lanes. Do not only watch whether a deal is signed, watch what the deal leaves behind. Because sometimes the most important part of a war is not the explosion. It is the new rule that appears after the smoke clears. Iran may have killed the deal, but the bigger question is whether Iran has already built something the deal cannot kill. If Hormuz reopens as a free waterway, then this crisis may still be contained. If Hormuz reopens as a permission-based corridor, then the word open will mean something very different than it used to. And if the world accepts that difference because it wants cheaper oil today, it may wake up tomorrow inside a system it no longer knows how to reverse. That is why this moment matters. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a line on a map. It is a test of memory. Does the world remember why open seas mattered? Does it remember what happens when energy routes become weapons? Does it remember that temporary emergency systems can become permanent if no one challenges them early enough? Right now, the old Hormuz is under pressure. The deal is damaged. The markets are nervous. The diplomats are racing. The militaries are watching. And ordinary people, far from the Gulf, may soon feel the result in the price of fuel, food, and everything that moves. So when someone asks whether the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the honest answer may be this: the water is still there. Some ships may still pass, but the old rules are in danger. And if the old rules die, then the Strait of Hormuz will not need to be blocked by mines or missiles to be permanently closed. It will be closed by a new reality, a reality where passage is no longer a right, but a favor. And that is the kind of closure the world may struggle to undo.